Hello, everybody. It's Saturday night at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, although not 10 o'clock where I am. I, of course, have Chris Weave. I am here with my brother, Delon, who is not really sitting 15 feet away. He's really only sitting like right there. It's just one of those perspective things. So Delon, I don't know if I asked you the last time in your job, when you are on like YouTube or something like that, are you speaking for your employer?
No.
Never?
No, never.
You know, what a coincidence. Neither am I. Okay, now that we got that out of the way. So it's me and Delon tonight. Pat is off doing Thanksgiving stuff. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. I am in Des Moines, where my brother lives. Tomorrow I get on an airplane and I fly to Las Vegas for work stuff for 2 weeks. And so that's the reason why I'm we're not going to be able to do the show next week, I don't think, because I don't think Pat's available, and I'm certainly not available because I will actually be on my way. I will actually be in San Diego. We're not working on the weekend, so I'm going to take the opportunity to drive down and go to a port with ships, Navy ships and stuff like that, and hang out with a couple of my one former coworker and another guy I know who's a science fiction author. He's going to make an appearance, a virtual appearance. His book is going to make an appearance later in this talk. So you may recall that last week we talked about, I talked about some of the books that I considered to be some of my favorite books. And so the plan this week is to sort of continue doing that sort of stuff. I'm going to go through the rest of the list. I'm going to expand on a few things that I could have covered a little bit better. Excuse me. I still have a little bit of that hacking cough. Might end up having to at some point mute it. And if you see me hacking away, I'm actually doing okay. It's not COVID. It's just that hacking cough that's going around. So, Right Sublet says, go see the Midway for him, please. I spent a lot of time in San Diego.
Sure. I love the Midway.
Yeah. So I've spent probably a total of 3 months ashore in San Diego, maybe something like that. I've been to San Diego 4 separate times. And was so a good solid 2 months ashore, because I was ashore for at least 2 months on each of those times. And the last time I was in San Diego, like literally the week after I left, they opened up the Midway. So I've actually never seen it. Don't know if I'm going to get a chance to on this trip, because I'm going to be hanging out with friends the entire time. But might very well do that. So let's see. I'm taking a real quick look to see if there's anybody else I want to do a call out to. TJ, I gave you a quick response. I literally was typing that out as the countdown was going down, so I really couldn't comment any more about that, but we'll talk later. I'm still behind in talking to everybody. I'm sort of recovering from all the medical stuff. It's being less and less of a distraction. Things are going better. I'm sleeping better, etc. But I'm still at the point where I'm way behind on everything. So I'm going to get caught up on it, and that's going to include some new content for this show going forward. But I haven't had a chance to implement any of the plans that I've had. So hey, Lissa, why don't you come on for just a second? Because if you're there still, she might have wandered off.
I'm still here.
Yeah, how was your Thanksgiving?
There were a lot of kids present. I love my cousins very dearly, but they were very loud. And I could not escape them because they were in the house. Oh, and my cats decided, because Kira gets anxious around lots of people, you will notice there is no curtain on my wall.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the fact that when they were trying to get away from the kids, they got in the windowsill and at some point in time fell down and pulled the curtain rod out of the drywall.
I've had cats do that. I've had cats. do
So
that,
I have a drywall patch that I need to put in before I can put the curtain rod back up.
Okay. Okay. Well, Alyssa, I just like to say that one of the things that I am thankful for is the fact that you're part of this show. So,
Oh, I'm thankful for you guys too. I love you all.
so it's a lot of fun. So, but Lissa does a lot. Lissa usually produces the show, not always, but usually. Sometimes somebody else will do it. Sometimes I'll do it on my own. But there's a lot of times, even when I'm the person who's going to be pushing the buttons during the actual broadcast, I will say, "Hey, Lissa, can you set up such and such? I don't have time." And so even when Lissa isn't there, she's there. And Lissa's very, very reliable, and that's fantastic. So,
Kira, would you like to come here, baby girl? She's winding up my door. One moment. Let me get her and show her off. Come here.
So we'll show her off, and then we'll get to the slides real quick.
I'll put something in here. Since you're usually used to seeing Chris's cat Buddy make an appearance, I have no pets. I have kids instead, and they're both odd. So,
Kira,
so
say hello.
I guess you might get as a 6'2", 300-pound 18-year-old come wandering down here.
You
there
probably
we go.
won't.
There's the floof.
Oh, she's adorable.
Yeah, aren't you?
She's adorable.
Okay. Would you like on my? Yeah, that's your spot. She what she likes to do is get on my headrest.
I'm surprised she can balance on it and be comfortable.
That's.
But cat.
She likes to do that, and then Esri will get in my lap, and it's like, I love you, but I'm trying to stream.
Yes.
It's great when she starts trying to groom my hair, and I'm in the middle of a battle.
Buddy will do some similar stuff in that I'll be either on a work call or a StreamYard or something like that, and he will be asleep for the 3 hours before that. But like 10 minutes before it's time to go on the air, he's right there wanting attention, demanding attention. So.
That sounds about right.
Cats are cats. So.
Cats will be cats, and they're gonna do what they're gonna do.
Yes, they are. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go to the slides.
Hi guys.
See you later. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about this, and then tomorrow, like I said, I go to Vegas tomorrow afternoon, and then San Diego next weekend, and then back to Vegas for some more stuff. And then I should be actually I should go ahead and do this. So already did the first bullet. My opinion's not my employer's. I'm behind in comments. I try to go back and go through the chat and do stuff like that. I haven't done that in a little while. I know I'm behind. I need to get. I've been dealing with some IT issues. They're getting closer to being resolved, but I'm still at the point where I'm sort of synchronizing computers. So no show next week because I'm going to be in San Diego, and I don't think Pat's available next week. So no show next week. But there will be a show the week after that on December 11th. I don't have a topic for that yet. I'll default to my Building a Navy talk, where I go through sort of all the different pieces that you need in order to think about a Navy. And it's really sort of aimed at people that are trying to design a Navy for a game or for a science fiction novel or something like that. But I can do that talk. Or the alternative thing is, if you tell me in the comments that there's some particular thing you want me to talk about, I will do it. Now, let me warn you, the less research that I have to do, the more likely it is that I'll talk about it. If you say, hey, Chris, just tell me, can you just tell sea stories for an hour? I can do that. I can tell sea stories for 4 hours easily. No problem. In fact, I got a talk that I do at science fiction conventions. It's literally just me telling sea stories sort of broken down by sort of like what it's like to live on a ship, et cetera, et cetera. And I can do that. If you want me to do a dissertation topic, it's probably not going to happen because it's something that I have to be able to fit in while I'm sitting in my hotel room in Vegas for the next couple of weeks. and I won't have next weekend to work on it. So, and I won't be home where I've got all my reference materials and stuff. So don't get too elaborate. But if there's something you'd like me to talk about next week, we're going to try the experiment of me tossing it out to you guys to pick the topic, and we'll see what ends up working. So, all right.
I also want to point out that that particular show, you're going to be here again.
Yeah, I'm going to be back here. I'm going to be
So-
sitting in this exact same chair. Maybe the monitor will be working better the next time.
Well, we'll hopefully have a few more hours to mess around with it.
Yeah,
And if push comes to shove, we'll just stick it on my laptop and go from there.
yeah, and take this little hub that we think is the problem out of it.
Mhm.
We think we know. We're having some technical issues, and we think we know what was going on with it, but we're not positive.
And we ran out of time.
And we kind of ran out of time. So, and it's okay. I've got stuff up on my iPad. And is that working? Speaking of my iPad. Okay. Yeah, it's working on the iPad. It got stopped somehow, and for a second there, I thought the iPad was showing that we weren't actually on YouTube. Okay, so topic-wise, I'm gonna go back to doing part 2 of the naval science fiction books worth reading. Mouse is a little sensitive. Like I said, this is a handout I give out at science fiction conventions. So this is what I talked about previously. I'm going to go ahead and do it again in case you haven't seen the previous one, but you should go and look at the last episode where I did the first part of this list. This is not, as I said before, it's not a list of my all-time favorite books. It doesn't include some that are on my list of favorites. It's the things that I find interesting as a naval analyst and a war game designer. And so if it doesn't fit in the category of that's why I have the interest in it, then I left it off the list. And great examples of that are Lee Modest's Adiamante and Gravity Dreams. Both are fantastic books that I read every couple of years. I love those books to death, but I really can't say that the things that I like about them have to do with, my naval analyst hat or my war game designer hat. This is a little out of date. My reading's a little out of date, but this is also, it's sort of a hacked together version. It's a partial update to a partial update to a 2008 thing. So it's a little long in the tooth, and I could really sort of sit down and redo it in some detail, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And it includes a lot of things that intrigue me, specifically tactical FTL combat with speed of light weapons and sensors. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Pre-planned responses, combat doctrine, predictive analysis, that sort of thing. And realistic combat. And realistic is in quotes because, realism depends upon your assumptions. So please don't not like something because of anything I say. My goal is not to make you like something. My goal, or to dislike something. I hope that I can lure you into looking at some stuff that maybe you haven't looked at previously, but nothing I say should prevent you from enjoying anything. And if you care about spoilers, the right answer is to sort of turn it off after you see the list of books, because there's going to be spoilers. Okay, so the ones in gray we did last time. We got all the way through to Robert Heinlein. I'm actually going to go back and touch up with Robert Chase's Game of Fox and Lion again, and I'm also going to touch up on Starship Troopers. There's a couple of things I want to add to those discussions, and then I'm going to go in and talk about Walter Hunt stuff on down to the end. And then there's actually some nonfiction books and some other stuff I have at the end that I'll tag on as well. So I put this slide on last time, but I added that part in red there about it being heavy on prediction and analysis. So we're talking about a situation where your sensors are limited to the speed of light, but you've got a tactically useful FTL drive that's trivial to engage. It's got high precision. There's not a whole lot of restrictions, meaning that you can use it, it's not one of those things where you can only use it out beyond the orbit of Pluto because nobody's going to fight out there, right? You have to be able to use it reasonably close to planets. And so what you end up with, because the fact that your sensors are always behind, you end up with something that sort of feels a lot like modern submarine combat, where the issue isn't necessarily putting a weapon on a target. If you can find the target, the issue is figuring out where the target is. It's sort of de facto stealth, but it's temporally based stealth instead of the physics of it or the physics of time rather than the physics of material science, etc. And one thing I forgot to say is that this type of combat ends up being heavy, heavy, heavy on prediction and analysis. And that should probably be analysis and prediction, because you need to do the analysis and then you're making a prediction about where the guy is, because you're trying to do a drive-by shooting of wherever the guy is, but you got to figure out what he's going to do. So the way to think of this is Ramius always turns to starboard at the bottom of the hour, right? We'll talk about that in just a second, a little bit more. So let's talk a little bit about tactical decision aids, because that's going to be a big part of that prediction and analysis part. So tactical decision aids those are things that are used in the real world. The idea is that it gives you an idea about what the right answer is in certain situations. And it can be anything from just a simple spreadsheet to something that's built into the core of the computer where you push a button and it does the calculation for you and gives you an answer. It can be anywhere in between that. This sort of concept becomes very important when you're dealing with speed of light sensors and tactical FTL, because otherwise you're constantly behind the problem. By the time you sort of acquire situational awareness, you're acquiring situational awareness about a situation that is now in the past. When everybody's close together, right? If you don't have a tactically useful FTL drive, everybody ends up close together and you can just see everything. If you have a tactically useful FTL drive, chances are things are going to spread apart, and it really becomes drive-by shootings. But the question is, how do you figure out where the guy is in order to do the drive-by shooting, right? You're out there trying to figure out where people are. You need to be able to predict where they're going to go. So maintaining situational awareness in this situation is hard, because the other guy can just skip away and you got to figure out where he is again. You've lost him. Like anytime you want to get off the other guy's sensor, you just skip away. Well, so how do you possibly hit in that situation? The answer is it's really about prediction, right? Now, everything else being equal, you're never going to hit the guy, but everything else isn't equal. He's got an objective. He's trying to accomplish something. He's trying to defend something. He's trying to attack something, etc. Otherwise, it may just be that he's trying to bushwhack you. There's some reason why this guy's going to stick around and fight, right? And you know what that reason is. There are astronomical phenomena that are going to restrict his maneuver. So I talk about not having a whole lot of restriction from something like gravity well, but in some of these you end up with situations where you still have to avoid the planets. You don't want to run into the planets, right? And if you're trying to defend a planet, that puts you in a situation where there might be some restrictions on what you can and can't do. In one of the ones I'm going to talk about in a moment, the Exordium series, for instance, you don't want a situation where you've got the planet directly behind you, because if the bad guys, if your opponent fires with one of the weapons could potentially be a planet killer. And so you don't want a situation where, they missed me, but they killed the planet. And you know this, and your opponent knows this. So it's not everything is equal. They've got some idea about what your behavior is going to look like. And then on top of that, there's the possibility that you actually know something about that guy, and you know something about his ship and his ship's capabilities and what he has a tendency to do. So I kind of call this the Exordium Solution, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the series, the Exordium series. But the Exordium Solution combines intelligence databases so that you figure out who your opponent is. It has a predictive tool, and that predictive tool is built in with something called the TENO. The TENO is a tactical decision language. You can think of it as a computer language, but it's a symbolic logic language that you use to build tactical command statements that allow you to both talk to the computer, and it allows the computer to give you information back at stuff that's at speeds that are approaching the limits of human decision making. So think Chinese, but it's all about combat. So there's another piece of this, and that predictive piece, and I should have put it on the slide. If you've ever seen the movie Equilibrium with Christian Bale and Sean Bean actually doesn't die in that movie. In the movie,
bad guy?
no, he's actually, well, the good guy is a bad guy.
Okay.
But he's kind of becoming a good guy. And Sean Bean is actually in the same category. So, come to think of it, he might die in that movie. It may be that he does, because he gets found out. He's doing some stuff that is against the society, and he gets found out. But this movie is done by Kurt Wimmer, and it has something called gun kata in it. And the idea behind gun kata is that they've analyzed thousands of gun battles, and they've developed a martial art that's based upon the idea. It's a martial art that you do with firearms, you do with pistols. And the idea is that because if you're a practitioner of this martial art and you've studied it, you can make predictions about where your opponent is going to be. So the idea is, like, you start to aim the weapon for a particular spot before the opponent is actually, in the spot that you're going to shoot. So you get the drop on him. It's sort of a more sophisticated version of, I know the guy's going around the house, and so I know he's going to pop out over there, and so I've got my gun waiting for him when he comes out. The difference here is that when you see Christian Bale's character do this stuff, there's sometimes he's taken shots where he's not looking in that direction. He just knows that statistically there's likely to be a guy over there, so he'll just point a gun and shoot. And sometimes he gets them, and sometimes he doesn't. And so Exordium is really gun kata with starships. The idea is that they've got this analysis, they've got this tactical symbolic language that they use, that they get data into and out of the computers. It has a grammar, it has a logic. In fact, the grammar is a big deal, because it turns out there's something going on in that series that the grammar doesn't support. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to that. And the end result is they have to redo the language in order to make it work, because otherwise they just get tilt. So that's the Exordium solution. And there's something I call the Exordium Tactical solution. So Exordium Tactical is a game that Arias Kaufman and I were developing. I still want to publish it. It's a game based on the Exordium series. And the idea this game came about when I was working with a war game designer named Chris Klug, and he was looking for inspiration. Now, Chris did the James Bond role-playing game. He was a Victory Games guy, did some stuff with Avalon Hill, or with SPI, and then he was a Victory Games guy. And so, and Chris is the guy who did Earth and Beyond, and he's now a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University. And some time ago, more than 20 years ago now, he was looking for inspiration to do a science fiction game, and a mutual friend, Fred Kish, put me in touch with Chris, and I sent him a bunch of stuff, including the Exordium books. And at the time, he said, "This is great. Let's do a game on this." And I talked him out of it, because I said, "Look, speed of light sensors, faster than light weapons, tactically useful FTL drive, one faster than light weapon. It's not only double blind, it's blind, it's multiple blind, and it's temporally out of sequence. You see stuff in the wrong order. If somebody's far away at time t and they jump close to me at time t+1, I may see them at t+1, and then they disappear, and then I see them back at time t, right? So it looks like they went one way and they really went the other way. How do you do that in a computer game? How do you do that in a board game? So I talked them out of it. Then I figured out how to do it. And the answer is to take a design for effect approach as opposed to a design for cause approach. You start off with a negative to hit modifier. So at the very beginning of the game, you're 3 feet away from the enemy ship and you can't hit him. He's 1 hex away. He's right in front of you. Your BFG is pointed right at him, and you can't roll a die high enough to hit him because you've got so many negative modifiers when you start. You have to acquire positive modifiers to get into positive numbers where you can actually hit him with a die roll. And so the way you do that is through something called contact levels. And basically, you make sensor die rolls over a period of time. And as you build the picture, you get positive modifiers. And then you also get the ability to pre-plot part of your move. Like he'll have to pre-plot before you have to finish pre-plotting. And so you see part of their move. You never see all of their move, but you see part of it. And that allows you, the human being, to predict where they're going to be. So I model the predictive tactical decision analysis tools by giving you, the human being, the ability to do that stuff. The game works really well. There's a few things we needed to fix, and there's some scenario stuff, and it sort of got caught in development hell for reasons having to do with agents, as in literary agents. But it is still something that I want to finish. And it was an interesting design sequence because I got this idea off of the old Avalon Hill game called Attack Sub, where you have a similar thing when the submarines and the surface ships where you're rolling to increase your contact level. And the higher your contact level is, you have all the cards that you're playing to conduct attacks have a certain minimum contact level on them. And like the torpedo cards, for instance, the torpedo cards that have a low contact level aren't very good torpedo cards. The ones that have a high contact level are much better. So as your situational awareness improves, you have more capability. So we put that in Exordium Tactical, and we played around with it some. Then a friend of mine was converting the full thrust into a submarine game that he was calling Deep Thrust. And he borrowed that mechanic and made it better. He added a good justification for why you could only roll against one target at a time, which was fantastic because we were looking at it and going like, oh my God, if everybody's rolling against everybody else on the board every time, that's a lot of die rolls. Brian came up with a very specific reason as to why you can only do that roll once. And it basically boils down to, if you're optimizing your maneuver to get information on one guy, you are by definition sub-optimizing it on everybody else. And so he felt fully justified in saying, you can only roll against one. You get to choose. And Arias and I then stole that mechanic back and put it back into Exordium Tactical, the Brian version of it. And it worked very well. So that's for tactical decision aids. Let's go on to, and I'm going to go back to, very briefly, Robert Chase's Game of Fox and Lion, because I didn't mention in that I think a key component of it is just not just that it's tactical FTL with speed of light sensors, but also the idea that it's got this predictive tactical decision aid. They're spending a whole lot of time analyzing how the enemy fleet is moving, and as a result, trying to figure out things like what are they going to do in the future, where are they going to go, et cetera, so they can mug them, but also things like where do they think their command ship is? And they're doing that by analyzing okay, the ships all seem to, something happens and then it takes them X amount of time to react to it. And so that X amount of time to react to it implies what their decision cycle is, and the distance where the command ship is part of that decision cycle. And so you got computers correlating all this information, going like, based upon all the information we're seeing, we think that this dot is where the command ship is. And so they try to mug that ship. So that's a very interesting game. A very interesting book in that regard. It's a simple little book. It's a quick read. It's a nice little book. But it's got the combat stuff in it is surprisingly sophisticated. Okay, so I want to go back to Starship Troopers for a second because I forgot something that's sort of like one of my pet rocks on Starship Troopers that I actually don't talk about really in my talk, but it's something I've had in the back of my head all the time. And that is the question of, why did all the ships collide in Klendathu orbit? Right? You may recall in Johnny's first drop on when they're dropping on Klendathu the first time, the Ypres and not the Valley Forge. Maybe it was Valley Forge. Yeah, Ypres and
sorry.
yeah, Ypres and Valley Forge collide in orbit, and killing his CO and a bunch of his colleagues, and they end up with this total disaster on the ground. Why did that happen? Well, I have a theory. And my theory as to why that happened, pure speculation on my part, wish Robert Heinlein was around to talk to about this. My speculation on that part is what they tried to do something that was a lot tighter maneuver than they normally did. And basically that somebody in the Navy said, we don't have to come into orbit and then dress the orbit, spend an orbit sort of getting everybody in position. We can come out of Cherenkov Drive right in our launch positions, and we can get the drop on them. We can get guys on the ground before, have Marines spitting out of the tubes before they even really know we're there. And they're going to drop guys on the ground so fast that they won't be able to respond to it. And that this was a living example about why you don't do it that way, right? There's, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice, they frequently aren't. And so this strikes me as one of those situations where they try to do something. They tried to do something fast. Maybe it's like, with the new navigation system, this should be a piece of cake. We can make this happen. And it just simply didn't work. So that's my theory. I need to do more of a write-up on it because I can put it in. For those of you who remember what the Marines were talking about 10 or 15 years ago, ship to objective maneuver is what got me thinking about this. That's the idea that the Marines kind of skip the beach and they go right from the amphib to direct to a sort of a deep landing point, right? So they don't take LCACs to the beach. Instead, they take helos and go in deep. That's what sort of got me thinking about this. Okay, so Walter Hunt's Dark Wing series. Now, I have to reread this series. I'm rereading it to get back up to speed on it. And because Walter's written a prequel and he's got basically 4/5 of a prequel done, and he wants some input on what the last fifth should look like. And so I need to get back up to speed on this universe. But the idea is that the humanity and the Zor keep having combat. They keep having wars, and they find themselves in a situation where even though they seem to be winning with the Zor, they're trying to avoid committing genocide. Humanity doesn't really want to just wipe out the Zor, but the Zor just don't seem to be getting the message. And along comes a military leader who has spent his time studying the Zor, and he thinks he knows what's going on here and what humanity has to do. Unfortunately, it really does kind of sound like committing genocide. It's more complicated than that. The series is definitely worth watching, or worth reading. And Walter's done some excellent world building, the sociological aspects of the anthropological aspects of how you interact with this alien society and sort of convince them that, they need to stop doing what they're doing. It's really pretty good across the board. I've already talked with Walter about coming on the show sometime. In fact, most of the people that I've mentioned here, I'm going to talk to at some level and try to get them to come on the show. A lot of them are people that I know. And Walter's certainly one of them. Walter's frequently a roommate of mine when we go to cons together. And so Walter's going to be on the show. And I've met Robert Chase. I know somebody who's a pretty good friend of his. I think maybe I can get him on the show, etc. So that's sort of the plan, is to get some of these people on the show so we can talk a little bit about their stuff. Okay, next is John Lumpkin's Human Reach series. Now, this is, John is somebody else. I haven't talked with him about this, but I want John to come on the show. I'm hoping he will. In this universe, there are no aliens. At least we haven't found them yet. It's an interstellar war among the various human nations. You can sort of think in terms of like GDW's 2300 in that regard. except the way that that you do FTL travel is through a network of wormholes that he calls keyholes. And so basically you create the matched ends of the wormhole, and you put one of them on a slower than light starship called the Valkyrie. It's a robot starship, and it drags it to another system. And now you've got a connection between the two systems, and you have to sort of balance them by feeding mass through them. You have to keep them in balance. So there are times where you have to just go and get, asteroidal material and break it up and feed it through. Because if it's all one-way traffic, you'll eventually run into problems. But basically, this is the story of the First Interstellar War, and it's the U.S. versus, it's like the U.S. and China and Britain versus Japan, if I remember correctly. And it's a very, very, very good series of books, and I'm hoping he gets around to doing more in the series. He's got the 2 out. Right now, he's busy being the CEO of Pavonis Interactive, who are the people doing the Terra Invicta video game. So that's keeping him busy. He went off and he first got busy because he went off to get a PhD, and then like in journalism or something, and then now he's the CEO of Pavonis Interactive. So I haven't talked to him in a while, and I need to get back in touch with him about it. Oh, and this is actually one of the handful of stories I know about creating a U.S. Space Force. In this one, it's been created. It's a new service combining portions of the Navy and the Air Force primarily, although I think there's some bits here from other services as well. And they are still trying to sort of figure out what their service culture is. It's really kind of interesting as the Navy parts of it and the Air Force parts of it find that they don't really speak the same language. And I totally get that. As somebody who's worked for both services, I totally and completely get that, because they don't speak the same language. They've got a fundamentally different approach to problems. Okay. Definitely worth reading. Next is Thomas May's A Sword into Darkness. Now, Tom is busy being a naval officer, and that's why we haven't seen a sequel to this. He wants to do it, but he keeps getting command, and as a result, he keeps being really, really busy. He also got married again in there. He got divorced and married again in there somewhere too, so that keeps him busy as well. I have not yet talked with him about being on the show, but I'm going to see him next week. This time next week, I should be in his presence, and so I'm going to talk with him about it then. So the idea... Oh. To be honest, I'm surprised I'm not coughing more. Okay, so the idea behind this is there's this astronomical phenomena that suddenly occurred, and it's a bright spot of what appears to be monochromatic light. This blue light just shows up. It's very bright in the sky as these things go. And this internet billionaire is convinced that this thing is the drive flare of a decelerating alien starship. And so he goes to NASA and says, you guys need to be doing something about this. And they sort of laugh him out of the room. NASA's not interested. The Air Force is not interested. And he does the calculation. He thinks that this is going to be a big deal in about 40 years. And so he can't get the U.S. to take it seriously. So he says, screw it. I'm an internet billionaire. I'm going to use my billions of dollars to solve this problem. And so he pays for research into the technology necessary to build a slower than light starship to go out and meet these folks. So there's a lot of nifty technology in there. In fact, one of the things I'm going to ask him is, did he really intend this to look a lot like thruster plates from Traveler? Because it really does kind of look a lot like thruster plates from Traveler. There's some nice repurposing of naval tech, like, for instance, if you look at the illustration of the cover, you can see that there's VLS cells on the side. His idea is that those are basically just the same sorts of VLS cells that the Navy uses on its warships. That, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't reinvent the wheel. And so that's a proven technology, and that's what they use to outfit the ship. And so they also add on some lasers and stuff, but the stuff that they don't need to reinvent, they don't reinvent. I also like that these are first generation ships and they have some technical flaws. There's some stuff that doesn't work as well in practice as they would like it to work. And so it's clear that they're going to have to go back and fix it for the next generation. And so I like the idea that, you can spend an awful lot of time designing something, you can do a lot of simulations, etc. But when you actually get in combat, that's where the proof is when you actually get in combat. And when they actually get in combat, they discover there's a few limitations that they're going to have to fix if they're going to have to fix for the sequels. Let's put it that way. Okay, next is Michael McCollum's Antares Trilogy. Now, Mr. McCollum is on this list twice for the Antares Trilogy and for the Gibraltar Earth Trilogy. In the Antares Trilogy, there is a human colony. It's basically at the far end of the jump point network and out near Antares. And when Antares finally goes supernova, it scrambles all the jump nodes in the network, right? Basically, you can think of jump lines. It's like Alderson points where you've got you go to a system, you go, okay, how many jump points do we think this has? Yeah, okay, we detect the jump point there. Let's see where it goes, sorts of deal. And you never really know where something goes until you test it. And you've got this elaborate network, and it may take you a short distance, it may take you a long distance. In the case of this colony world, the jump point just goes away until like 100 years later when it comes back. It's in a little bit different place. Antares is now a supernova in the sky, right? And as that shock wave passes, the network sort of resets itself, and they get a visitor. It's a Terran battleship that comes in from the jump point from Antares, and it's clearly been in a fight, and it lost. The crew's dead. Crew all died of radiation, but the robot, the astropilot, the autopilot, brought it through. Find a jump node and then get out of here, and it ended up in this colony system. And so, okay, so now we've got an indication we're reconnected to the rest of the world, and when they go out looking, they find the jump point, and we've got an indication that some bad shit is going down out there. So they take the old Terran starships that were trapped there when the jump points went away, refurbish them, and send them out to find out what's going on. And they discover there's a big war taking place between humanity and an alien species. It's really sort of interesting how the two empires are interpenetrated, because these jump lines don't go from, they're not closest point to closest point. So it could be that the next closest star to you in physical distance is actually an enemy-held star, but you can't get to it through the jump point. You'd have to go through real space. This has a lot of really interesting strategic implications, right? You think about it, your FTL drive, how your FTL drive really, really affects strategy in this regard. I've talked in the past about Edward Luttwak's grand strategy of the Roman Empire and how it teaches you how to think about borders. This is a fantastic example of that, because you do have borders in this situation. You have internal lines of communication, etc. Star Trek, borders are almost meaningless in Star Trek. They're not totally meaningless because you've got these ridiculously capable sensors that can detect somebody crossing a border in space, and so you can go intercept them. But in a lot of instances, in a lot of science fiction, if you've got a jump drive, you can go from here to there. A border's kind of meaningless in that regard. If I can go to any place, where do I defend? And so you end up in the same sort of situation the Romans found themselves in during the crisis of the 3rd century, where it used to be that they had really good borders, but their borders were now undefensible. They had built this nice Roman road network that the invaders could use as well as the Romans could. And so you had this situation where for a long time, the cities didn't have walls. They didn't need it. All of a sudden in the 3rd century, everybody starts rebuilding their walls, because in that time period, all defense was local. And if all your defense is local, it's a much different strategic situation than if you can say, like, if I hold this jump point is the key to the defenses. So the Antares Trilogy is a nice series of books. First two books were published by Tor, but Mccollum was dropped when Del Rey. But Mccollum was dropped when Del Rey purged their midlist. And so then he published through Sci-Fi Arizona, which is his imprint. He published the third book in the series, and it was well worth the wait. So another Michael Mccollum book series is the Gibraltar Earth Trilogy. And the idea behind this is we discovered that there's an alien race out there that uses these jump gates to maintain an empire, and they basically have conquered everybody out there. But they don't know we exist yet. We know they exist. They don't know we exist. What are we going to do about this situation? Well, they're eventually going to find us. We know that they're eventually going to find us. So we got to come up with something. We're going to have to take them down without them knowing that they're under attack. And so we infiltrate their web. We build listening posts. We do a whole bunch of interesting things to try to conduct psychological operations against them. We build ships that look like ships of known enemy races, but they have certain capabilities. There's a lot of excellent world building and interesting tech. There's multiple FTL technologies. The aliens basically go with one particular FTL technology because it requires the use of these jump gates, and they control the jump gates. So, but there are other FTL technologies, and so part of this deal is to try to spread those technologies in the hopes that maybe they'll end up with some allies, or at the very least that the bad guys will be so busy dealing with, like, where's all this tech coming from, that they won't find Earth. One of the things that I like that's a very, very important planning factor in all of this is that the human forces realize that if they ever get a human corpse to analyze, we're toast. And that's because you can do an analysis of the human eye and figure out what sort of light we evolved to be under. You do, which right there tells you what our star looks like, and that narrows things down a lot. And you can also learn things about, what sort of planet we grew up with, et cetera. But once you sort of narrow down what star we are, what type of light it is, they do a complete sky survey, and now they got all the places they should go look. So now it's hard for them to go look because their system works. They have to they jump to a place and then they have to build a jump gate to get back. But their tendency is that they explore by sending an entire fleet to go wipe out whatever it is if they find it. And they basically know that, in this situation, they'll come and they'll just wipe us out. So it's a very interesting series. I need to reread it. It's been a while. Okay, Jack Mcdivits, A Talent for War, is one of my all-time favorite books. And the premise behind this book is that Alex Benedict is tracking down a historical mystery. His uncle Gabe was also an archaeologist, and he was working something, but Alec doesn't know what, because Alec and Gabe had sort of had a falling out at one point because Alec does archaeology for money. He's one of these guys who collects artifacts and sells them to rich people, whereas Gabe was in it for the scientific endeavor. He was in it for the history. And so Gabe disappears. Gabe's cruise liner just disappears. That sometimes happens as he was going off to start this expedition. And Alec Benedict has to sort of figure out what's going on with this. And it all has to do with Christopher Sim, who was this hero of a war about 200 years in the past. And the more Alec Benedict pulls the thread, the more it doesn't make sense. The more the facts don't seem to match. the more that you do the analysis of the battles, etc., and these questions keep coming up, like, how are they in two places at almost the same time? How did this work? Etc. And there, he's able to pull out and find a lot more about what was actually going on. And there was a lot of myth going on, and he's able to basically figure out what really happened. And there's so much stuff in this novel that just really, in a lot of ways, really speaks to me. And I included a quote there. I won't read it. I'll let you guys just read it. But the idea, for instance, that one of the powers in this war that was on the same side as Christopher Sim and the Delicondans, that their reverence for him is still so high that all fleet communication call signs use his flagship's call sign. There's just these little things like that. He's constantly, like, they'll go into a room and he'll describe, on the wall was a copy of, this famous 28th century painter, his painting of Christopher Sim on the bridge of such and such. He tells there's these legends. He talks about operas, like there's an opera that's based upon one of the characters who supposedly deserted Christopher Sim, but there's some question as to whether he really did or not. There's debating societies that debate all this stuff. It's just an incredibly rich background, and the history major in me just squeeze with delight whenever I read it. So the next book, Kevin O'Donnell's Fire on the Border, is another one of these tactical FTL with speed of light sensors. The premise behind this is there's an alien empire that is fighting another alien empire, and they're in a standoff. They've been fighting for God knows how long. And the one set of aliens decides that they're going to start using human space as their training ground, because getting their guys blooded, getting them a little combat experience will make them much more effective. So they give them the combat experience by having them conduct assaults on human worlds and slaughtering all the inhabitants. And they're basically, where the human empire is told, don't interfere when this happens. Well, the military basically says, screw you. There's parts of the military that say, screw you, we're going to interfere. And so basically you have a situation where you have the rebellion, but the rebellion is the people who go off to actually do the job that they were trained to do, which is to defend the colonies. And it's a fascinating story. And one of the things I really like about it is, like, when they have combat scenes, it's like they'll detect that a ship they have that bit where stuff happens out of order, and you'll see stuff out of order. You'll see a ship up close, and then you'll see a ship appear farther away. And the tactical decision aid will say things like, there's an 89% chance that it's the same ship, that we're just seeing where the ship was earlier before it jumped closer. And then eventually that ship goes away, and it's like, okay, now it's 100% chance, because we've correlated all the timestamps, and we know that that's exactly what happened. What we thought was happening happened. They came in at a distance. We were, our information sphere, they knew where we were. They jumped closer to where we were. We just saw the events out of order. It's a very nifty book, and it helps you understand all that stuff. Oops. I almost skipped the Exordium series, which would be horrible. So this is a 5-book series done by Sherwood Smith and Dave Trowbridge. It's my all-time favorite series. There's been two editions of it. The first one was Dead Tree mass market paperback only, and it came out in the 90s. The second one, of which this is a cover from the second one, is an ebook and audiobook only, and it's done through Bookview Cafe. And that second edition has some very substantial revisions. The first book, The Phoenix in Flight, the first book of the first edition had a few issues with it. I always used to tell people when I'd give them a copy, promise me that you'll read to at least page 100. Because I almost failed my morale roll on page 80. And I said, I'll give it another 20 pages. And oh my God, am I glad I did. And it's the structure of it's a little broken in that regard. And they fixed that in the second edition, and they added a bunch of other stuff. I was a little disconcerted with Dave and Sherwood when Dave in particular told me that they were putting the hood up and making a bunch of changes to the second book. And I said, Dave, the second book is perfect. What are you doing? And I was wrong. The second book wasn't perfect. Or if it was perfect, it's even more perfect now. So I already talked about the Tenno. It's got a compelling background. It's in a lot of ways, I sort of describe it as everything I wish Traveler was. And as I said, Arias and I were working on a war game in the series, and I still want to publish that war game at some point. The basic premise is that the panarchy of the Thousand Suns is the big dog polity in that section of space. They're very disconnected from Earth. There was a wormhole that allowed them to travel to the other side of the galaxy, or maybe even another galaxy. It's sort of unclear, but that wormhole has since collapsed, so they're kind of on their own. They're the big dog polity there. There's an alien empire next door that sort of collapsed, and every now and then raiders come in and they have to sort of fight them off. But as a general rule, they're the 800-pound gorilla in their section of space. Well, there's a smaller polity called Duljar that attack them. They were basically trying to do a little empire building, and they attacked either some panarchic colony worlds or panarchic allies. I can't remember which. And so they end up with this sharp war that ends up with most of Duljar's fleet destroyed and peace terms imposed on them. And Eusebian, the ruler of Duljar, isn't going to take this. And unbeknownst to the panarchy, some archaeologists found a very, very interesting artifact that's going to change the balance of power. And so the youngest son of the panarch, Brandon, evades a ceremonial duty. He sort of evades his coming of age ceremony where he dedicates himself to a life of service. And he does it in a way that it was specifically designed to piss off all the elites of his society for reasons that become sort of OBE when everybody in that room is killed and his two older brothers are killed and his father is captured. All this stuff happens very early in the book. And so now Brandon is the heir. He was the third son. He was never expected to be the heir. Brandon is now the heir. And he's on the run because Duljar wants to get him. The people who see a power vacuum in the panarchy and think that maybe they're the ones to fill that power vacuum want to get him. And so it's a very, very interesting series with the would-be panarch on the run. Excellent series. Can't say enough good things about it. Want to have Dave and Sherwood on the show. So I'm not going to go into the Honor Harrington series much. I mean, I could, but there's 30-some books in the series. I don't even know where to start. My guess is everybody's probably read them, so I probably don't need to. If that's not the case, then please tell me in the comment section, and maybe we can do a show on it. Actually, Alec Peters and I really sort of reconnected the second time because we were on a panel with David Weber together talking about how Honor Harrington affected Axanar, how it influenced Axanar. And that's sort of where I reconnected with him. I'd had a little bit of contact with Alec earlier, a couple of years earlier, but that's where we sort of sat down and went, oh, okay. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff in common. David's really thought through all the naval aspects of this. It's very, very rare where I go, hey, did you think about X? And it's totally out of left field from him. And in the instances where he hasn't necessarily thought that particular thing through, he's thought everything else through to such a degree that he can answer those questions. So he's got a very, very good handle on this stuff, even at the level of like Havenite Marines and Manticoran Marines have different mission descriptions and as a result have dramatically different training. So like if you want to do space boardings, Havenite Marines are, if I remember correctly, are not trained for that because there's another group that does that for them. David's really thought this stuff through, and from that standpoint, I can say nothing but good things about the series. Okay, we're almost at the end. This might actually be the last one. Scott Westerfield's Succession, which is the compilation version of the novels The Risen Empire and The Killing of Worlds. This is a situation where starships are slower than light. The hero is part of the Risen Empire. It's one of like a half dozen or so human polities in space. Their main opponent is the Ricks. The Ricks try to seed compound minds, which develop into planetary AIs, and the Empire is trying to stop that stuff from happening and defending themselves against the Ricks and others. The reason why it's called the Risen Empire is that at some point the Emperor was a scientist who created this symbiote that can bring the dead back to life, as long as they're not too dead. Like they have to only be mostly dead. I think if they're totally dead,
You bring John Cleese into this along the way?
well, that's not a John Cleese thing. That's a Billy Crystal. He's only mostly dead. Princess Bride.
Okay.
So
I was thinking that was Monty Python. But okay.
No, it's Princess Bride.
Okay.
So the main character, Laurent Zai, is the CEO of a frigate, a brand new class of ship, or a brand new type of frigate anyway. Fantastic technology on it. It's very, very interesting how they do stuff. It's worth reading just for the technological descriptions within it. There's something in particular I was going to say about. There's a quote from the book that the original intent was I was going to read you the quote, but I don't currently have it up. But it talks about, partway through, it talks about that there are 4 different kinds of gravity. There is natural gravity, which is caused by planets. And there's easy gravity, which is what you use on ships, but it's largely neutralized in the presence of a real gravity field, and it's not totally stable. It's mostly stable, but it does mean every now and then there's a little twinge. So, no building houses of cards. Gyroscopes are sort of unpredictable in it, so you really can't use gyroscopes with it. Every now and then it just sort of glitches a little bit. But, it's good enough to sort of protect you in the ship and give you a sense of gravity. There's a chaotic form of gravity, which basically causes everything to sort of disperse. It actually reminds me of one of the weapons in the Exordium series, which is a device called the Ruptor. Ruptors fire unpolarized gravitons. Polarized gravitons are tractor beams and pressor beams. Unpolarized gravitons basically vibrate a target to pieces by yanking it in multiple different directions at the same time. And that's really sort of what this weapon is in Succession, or what that type of gravity is. And then the final type of gravity is called lovely gravity, and it can operate in a gravitational field, but it's horrendously expensive to create from an energy standpoint. And when Laurent Zai is turned into one of the Risen, he was involved in thwarting a terrorist incident and gave his life to do that. And so they give him a symbiote, and he gets to join the ranks of the Risen. when he's going off to his ceremony, the Emperor sends an air car to come and get him, an anti-grav air car to come and get him. And as they're sort of sailing through the city, he does a calculation and concludes that the energy cost of that flight is equivalent to the energy expended in the first 50 years of human industrialization. And it's just, it's basically, it's like, that's one of the rewards you get when the Emperor promotes you, is you get to ride in an anti-grav air car. And one of the other characters makes the comment, he's an admiral, he makes the comment that he sweated through all that math at the academy specifically so that he would it made it all worth it to understand exactly what that gesture meant. So it's got fantastic space combat scenes. It's got fantastic, just everything about that book I really, really like. It's one that I go back and sort of reread every couple of years. So that was it for the fiction list. Let me put this up real quick. I'm not going to go through all these in any sort of detail, but this is a nonfiction list of things that I would recommend. Carl Bilder's Masks of War. Basically anything Carl Bilder wrote was worth reading. This is talking about the various cultures of the services. Unfortunately, he doesn't include the Marines, but he does include the other three services, the other three DoD services, and sort of like how their worldviews work. Corbett, some principle of maritime strategy, especially the appendix at the end called the green pamphlet. It's the single best breakdown of naval theory, and you can get it online from Project Gutenberg. James George's History of Warships. Now, it's an overview about how ships have changed over time. It is, the caveat that Jim George gives is that, there's exceptions to every rule. And there's exceptions to every rule, but he's talking about the broad sweep, and it's definitely worth reading. Tom Hone and Trent Hone's book Battle Line, about U.S. Navy tactical development in the interwar period, is a fantastic book, and there's some very interesting nuggets in there, especially when combined with Harris Lanning's Admiral's Yarn. The second appendix in that, it's the naval battle, which is about how to think about how you fight with a battle line. And so those two together are just fascinating books. And you can find, I think I found an Admiral's Yarn on Scribd, if I remember correctly. It's out there. Wayne Hughes's Fleet Tactics. So there's 3 or 4 editions of this. The first one is called Fleet Tactics Theory and Practice. The second is Fleet Tactics in Coastal Combat. I think the current one is Fleet Tactics and Maritime Operations. All fascinating books, all very useful in understanding how to think about tactical combat. Already talked about Luttwak's Grand Strategy of the Roman Empire. Fantastic book. I recommend it to anybody who wants to do a strategic level space combat game. Marshall Savage's The Millennial Project, Colonizing the Galaxy in 8 Easy Steps. You can't accuse Marshall Savage of thinking small. And finally, Frank Uhlig's How Navies Fight, the U.S. Navy and its Allies. And it talks about sort of the approach that navies have, different navies have had, the strategic situation they're in and how they deal with that. And, what are the fleets they build and the doctrine they use. And Frank was just a total and complete gentleman. I wish I had had more time to talk with him about that. He used to be editor of the Naval War College Review. He was long retired when I knew him, when I was a professor up in Newport. He passed away about 5 or 6 years ago at age 150 or something. Fantastic guy. Always loved it when I went to a lecture and I got a chance to sit and talk with Frank. He was just a wonderful human being. So one last slide, a bunch of interesting stuff on the internet. Some of it's stuff I wrote, some of it's stuff other people wrote. I suggest that the right answer is that you just freeze that page and look through it. At some point, I'll try to copy all those links and put them down in the comment section so that people get a chance to pull it down. Some of it includes like the Six Sun Concordance, which is Tom Harlan's basically background wiki for his universe. There's a few other things like that too. I don't have John Lumpkin's, but I discovered that he's done some work on that. So I'll have to add that to the list. So that's it for what I've got for this week. So, okay. And let me take a real quick look to see if there's anything obvious over. Probably won't have a whole lot of time to go through anything. Nothing is jumping out at me right now. Other than Philip Banks suggests Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire is expressed in science fiction. That sounds good. If you would please post that in the comment section and not the chat section, just because it'll be easier to get to in the comment section. I thank you very much for that. That sounds like a pretty good one. Nothing else is jumping out at me right now. So with that in mind, I think the right answer is for us to just go ahead and end it for this week. So thank you very much for everything, everybody. If you haven't stopped to like it and subscribe, please do those things, because at some point we're going to start paying attention and try to, I'm beginning to do some thinking about the branding stuff and try to make that stuff better. We've got enough content out there to sort of for new people to sort of to jump in. So it's time for us to start thinking about branding. So if you guys can help out with that, that would be fantastic. And that's one way you can help out. So with that in mind, Delon, any last minute thoughts?
I'm just happy to be here.
I'm happy you are here too.
I mean, I contributed so much to this whole thing.
You contributed the most important thing, which was a good network connection. Because trust me, if I tried to do this from our dad's point, it would be really jerky the entire time, because he still uses DSL. So,
well, okay, in his defense, and I'm going to,
yeah.
In Dad's defense, he basically has the best that he's allowed for his house without actually changing providers on a large scale.
And we need to fix that for him. We need to fix that
now.
For him,
and on top of that, got to keep in mind here, the man is 80 some years old. I mean, internet's a wonderful, kind of voodoo technology sort of thing to him. He really doesn't get it.
It's a problem Delon and I have to solve. So,
yes.
You may see future shows from my dad's place as I come back and visit, because I moved to Ohio specifically so I could come to Des Moines on a more frequent basis to see my family. So with that in mind, everybody, thank you very much for another wonderful show. You guys are fantastic, and I really appreciate the fact that you come in and spend your Saturday night with us. So with that in mind, see you next time. 2 weeks. See you in 2 weeks.